Hello, everybody. It is my great pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of the organizers of this roundtable, on behalf of Foreign Policy Center and Justice for Journalists Foundation. Our roundtable, as you know, is called Ukraine, Media Freedom, Disinformation, and the Effectiveness of Calls for Redress. I will just start with a couple of housekeeping issues. So as you know, the event is in English, but the interpretation into Ukrainian is available. You can switch the channels in the lower panel of your screen. There is a little globe button. You can press it and you'll just switch to the Ukrainian interpretation. Also, this roundtable is being live streamed on the Facebook and on YouTube, and it is also being recorded, so it will be available shortly after the roundtable ends. It is my pleasure to introduce our chair for today. Sir John Whittingale is the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Media Freedom and also a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Ukraine. He's also the head of the UK delegation in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. So John, take the floor is yours, please.
Maria, well, thank you very much. As you say, I've just recently returned from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in Vienna, where I act as Special Rapporteur on War Crimes and reported on the growing evidence of multiple war crimes in Ukraine. But one of those is definitely the deliberate targeting of journalists. And I know that there has already been a lot of evidence of that taking place. 43 journalists killed, 470 crimes against journalists. And that is something which I have followed closely. And I'm very pleased the Foreign Policy Center have put together this panel this afternoon to discuss what is a very serious aspect of the war taking place in Ukraine. So can I thank our panelists for taking part today, and to introduce them quickly. We have Sergei Tomilenko, President of the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine, Yevgenia Velich of the Online Media Capital City, then I think Ricardo Gutierrez, General Secretary of the European Federation of Journalists, and then Victoria Dovchenko.
Almost, Dovchenko, yes.
Oh, thank you. But thank you for your help. Who is at the Boris Grynchenko University. So I'm going to invite the speakers in that order to make their presentations. If you wish to ask a question, perhaps you'd like to write it in the Q&A box below, and then I'll endeavor to take them. But can we, first of all, can I invite Sergei to open?
Dear friends, dear colleagues, hello from Kiev. Доброго дня з Києва, з Хрещатика. I'm nice to meet you. And I have the honor to head the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine, the largest journalist organization in our country. And I want to thank to Foreign Policy Center and our partner, Justice for Journalists Foundation, for organizing today's important webinar. And special thanks to Sir John Whittingale, who is our chairman now. The main goal of our meeting is the fight against injustice and impunity. Today, we present the data of our monitoring of violation of journalists' rights and attacks on press freedom in Ukraine, but mainly the source of these violations is Russia, which unleashed this bloody war in the center of Europe. Calling for justice, we support the initiative to create a tribunal against Putin, and we especially emphasize the need to introduce a special tribunal against Russia for inciting war propaganda and for war crimes against journalists and the media. With the beginning of Russia's full-scale aggression, Ukrainian journalists faced many challenges and threats, not only as residents of the territories that came under enemy shelling or occupation, but also to a larger measure due to their professional activities. The Russian military hardly hide the fact that they consider Ukrainian or international journalists the target of their shelling and attacks. There are numerous cases of targeted attacks on cars marked with the inscription press, deliberate killings of journalists working near the front line, attacks on publishing houses, arrests, kidnappings, torture, deprivation of media workers of the opportunity to conduct independent professional activities in the temporarily occupied territories. Since the beginning of the war, the occupiers have killed at least 47 media workers. The fate of several more remains unknown. According to the verified data of our union and JFJ Foundation, among the dead are 8 journalists while carrying out their professional duties, and at least 4 media workers were tortured and murdered by the invaders on the temporarily occupied territories. The rest killed as civilian victims or defending their country in the ranks of the armed force of Ukraine. We bow our heads to their memory. And this is only the physical aspect of Russia's crimes against freedom of speech in Ukraine. But the consequences of Russia's aggression for Ukrainian journalism are not limited to this. As a result of shelling of civilian facilities, settlements and residential buildings, waves of forced displacement of local residents and destruction of the economy are provoked. Ukrainian journalists experience enormous psychological stress caused by difficult life conditions, a catastrophic lack of funding, and gigantic responsibility to our audience. We were not ready for all this. All Ukrainian journalists became frontline journalists in one day, 24th February last year. Thanks to the bravery and resilience of media workers from Ukraine and other countries, thanks to the solidarity of our foreign colleagues, International and European Federation of Journalists, UNESCO, Justice for Journalists Foundation, and a number of international organizations, we were able to partially withstand the first wave of numerous challenges. The NUJU has launched a network of journalist solidarity centers, which helps journalists who are in trouble. They have lost their housing, workplace, and work equipment. We have created working spaces and a circle of communication in new places for migrant journalists. And if possible, we are looking for financial ways to renew their professional activities. This is how we managed to help 2,000 colleagues who were in trouble. One of the main priorities of our union during the war is to assist journalists in ensuring that their work is as safe as possible in wartime conditions. So we assist more than about 300 helmets and vests, and we now assist rental points for journalists, and we want to protect our colleagues. Today, it's difficult for all of us to imagine a world without digital gadgets, but the digital world ends where mobile towers and power grids are pulled down by artillery and rockets of the occupiers. People in the deoccupied territories say that during the Russian occupation, the main source of relatively truthful information for people was meetings on local markets. Those who had battery-operated radios told others what they had heard from Kyiv. Instead, Russian propaganda created a completely distorted information world for people in which Kyiv and other large cities are occupied by the Russians, Ukraine has fallen, and the West is beginning the Kremlin for mercy. That is why our Union of Journalists of Ukraine made every effort to return Ukrainian media to the occupied territories, where there is no television or internet, and the true source of information should be a newspaper. Currently, with our assistance, a total of 20 local newspapers have been restarted in the deoccupied and frontline territories, and now they are the main sources of information for Ukrainians on these conditions. And as we see, this initiative caused a lot of positive feedback. Newspapers are delivered to towns and villages through which the frontline passes. Newspapers even end up in the trenches. There is evidence that people are so happy with their local brands and local newspapers that they receive, that they kiss them, these newspapers, and they hope for next victory and peace. And Ukrainian journalists, like every Ukrainian, are driven by the desire to protect truth and justice in the face of injustice. In Ukraine, there is a struggle between good and evil. Ukrainian journalists, being on the side of good, carry out the mission of recording war crimes committed by those who violate human rights and abuse people. The resilience of Ukrainians, reflected by journalists, attracts the attention of the world. Over the year, Ukraine managed to lead the coalition of global good in the fight against global evil. Without the great solidarity of Ukrainians, British, Europeans, Americans, citizens of the entire democratic world who can put up with evil, this great unjust war would not have come to the attention of the global public. Today, Ukraine is fighting for justice. Glory to Ukraine. Journalists are important. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Sergey, very much, and for painting such a clear picture of the horrendous problems facing journalists in Ukraine. And I join you in saluting not just those who have lost their lives, but to all journalists seeking to bring truth of what is happening in your country. Can I invite now Yevgenia Village of Coven City to give her account of what it's like as a publisher of a online media in Ukraine today. Yevgenia, over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, my dear colleagues and friends. Do you hear me? Is that all right? Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor for me to speak here and talk about Kherson. Actually, today, the 1st of March, is the anniversary of the encirclement of Kherson by the Russians. In fact, the anniversary of the beginning of the full occupation of our town by the Russians. On this day, they fired at many buildings in our town and burned down the largest shopping center. And today we remember those people from Kherson who tried to stop the Russians in Lilac Square. It's a square in our city. These Chersonians had no weapons. They went unarmed against Russian tanks. Today it's known about 24 killed by the Russians. From the first day of the invasion, the Russians persecuted public people and journalists and all the pro-Ukrainian people. I know that some public people were visited by Russian sabotages groups even before February 24th. That is, they settled in Kherson in December 2021, February 2022. We saw how Russians tried to come into Kherson City Council on February 25th, However, there were many volunteers in the building, so the Russians did not succeed. Almost immediately, the Russians received information about where are the journalists with their addresses, about public people and other people who actively support Ukraine. They went from house to house and kidnapped the people. There are many people from Kherson still in captivity of the Russians. According to various sources, it's several hundred people. They kidnapped people at protests where several thousand Kherson citizens went out. It was very dangerous for journalists to stay, but many journalists stayed anyway. Some even stayed in Kherson for whole the period of occupation. We were hiding. We spent in occupied city 4.5 months. We changed the locations. Our friends helped us. They left us several sets of keys to their apartments. Our friends moved from the city and they were ready to give us shelter in their flats so the Russians wouldn't find us. After all, I know that we were searched by the Russians 4 times during their occupation. When I came home for the first time after the occupation, I went home in December 2022. My neighbor told me that Russians had been looking for me many times. I didn't ask how much it was. In general, Russians and local collaborators were looking for journalists, but we tried to keep our media Kavun city. We continued to write. We maintained contact with the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine. Actually, the union helped us to leave Kherson in July 2022. We are very lucky. Me and my husband, we did not get captured. We continue to work and we are working now. But there are some of our colleagues who were captured by the Russians. For example, Angela Slobodyan, who spent a month in captured by the Russians, and Zhanna Kiselova and others. We continue to work and cover events in the Kherson region and follow the events in our region. Thank you very much. If you have some questions, I'm ready to answer.
Thank you, Eugenia, and I salute you on the extraordinary work that you're doing and enormous courage. We will take questions, I think, once we've heard from all our speakers. But before doing so, can I ask Ricardo Gutierrez of the European Federation of Journalists, if you'd like to speak.
Thank you, Sir John, and good afternoon to all participants. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present our views. The European Federation of Journalists is the representative organization for journalists in Europe. We represent 300,000 journalists in 45 European countries, including Ukraine and the UK, of course. The EFJ has identified 12 cases of journalists killed in the course of their work as journalists in Ukraine. We reported these cases to the Council of Europe platform for the protection of journalism. Most of these cases date back to a period from the beginning of March 2022 to the end of May 2022. The victims include 7 Ukrainian, 2 French, including 1 French-Irish journalist, 1 American, 1 Lithuanian, and 1 Russian. From the very first case, that of cameraman Yevgeny Sakun, you may remember he was killed in a missile attack on the TV tower in Kiev on the 1st of March 2022. From this incident, the EFJ raised the possibility of war crimes, deliberately targeting the media, journalists. And this was later confirmed with the targeted attacks on media vehicles, duly identified as press vehicles. The Russian intention to kill journalists was also confirmed by the attack that killed French journalist Frédéric Leclerc-Imhoff on the 30th of May 2022, while he was covering an evacuation of civilians in the Luhansk region. Our position as professional organization is very clear. War crimes against journalists and civilians must be investigated. We believe that laws of war violations against civilians, including rapes, killings, and other acts of violence by Russian armed forces, as well as the looting of civilian property, deserve the strongest possible condemnation. In light of these war crimes committed on Ukrainian civilians, the protection of journalists becomes even more important. Why is it? Because it is journalists who are often the first ones to cover and to document these crimes. Their reporting on the ground provides evidence that is crucial for accountability and justice. Their safety is essential to keep the flow of reliable information, to counter disinformation, and to better prosecute the crimes committed against Ukrainian people. You know it, under international law, journalists must be protected and must enjoy the same rights as civilians, even when accompanying military forces for the purpose of reporting. Together with our Ukrainian affiliates, NUJU and IMTU, we've collected stories of Ukrainian journalists being kidnapped, imprisoned, beaten, and tortured by Russian forces. We believe that those responsible need to be brought to justice. Deliberate attacks on civilians, including journalists, constitute a war crime and must be investigated and trialed accordingly. The EFJ joins the international community in seeking international support to create a special tribunal for the crimes of Russian aggression against Ukraine. We welcomed, of course, the vote in the European Parliament on 19 January on a resolution demanding the Russian political and military leadership be held accountable for these crimes against Ukraine. Establishing such a tribunal would fill a vacuum in international crime justice. This tribunal will have the opportunity to complement the investigative efforts of the International Criminal Court. As stated by the European Parliament, we believe that the special tribunal must have jurisdiction to investigate not only Vladimir Putin and the political and military leadership of Russia, but also Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus. This proposal is now supported, you know it, by the Council of Europe, by the European Commission, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, many MEPs in many European countries, including in the UK, the European Parliament. We believe that it's now high time to take action. As a professional representative organization, the European Federation of Journalists will strongly cooperate with the tribunal in order to establish war crimes against journalists and media workers. The last thing I will mention is that the European Federation of Journalists will hold its annual meeting soon in The Hague in May. And I believe that this is that's a very symbolic place to make a strong case for the creation of this special court. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ricardo. In terms of war crimes, obviously I, as Special Rapporteur OSCE, gave a presentation last week. The UK is doing as much as we can to support the Ukrainian judicial system, where I suspect the majority of cases will need to be brought. But I've also visited the International Criminal Court, which, as you know, has opened investigations, and undoubtedly there will be prosecutions there. And you know, the OSCE is also one of the organizations alongside those which you mentioned, which agrees that we will need a special tribunal if we are to ensure that not just those directly responsible, but those who ultimately bear responsibility in the leadership are also held to account. So I'd also like to thank all of your members for the extraordinary job they're doing and collecting the evidence which will be needed when we get to that stage. So thank you. And finally, Victoria Dovichenko, if I've now got that right.
Perfect.
Can I hand over to you?
Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you so much, all of the panelists, and specifically, thank you for Foreign Policy Center for organizing and co-organizing this event in a very specific and strategic timing. We were talking, and we are still talking here about rule of law that is prevailing, right? So it's not only about the journalists, but it is specifically about the journalists and those people who support documenting the war crimes. And in order to be precisely, I'm not a journalist myself. I'm an associate professor and working within academia mostly, but as a team lead of some of the projects, I'm very much related to, let's say, advising the policymakers what are the next steps and practical. So therefore, my very short remarks will be very practical, if you may, like kind of 3 points that I've seen already in the Q&A session. Some of them I can already start tackling. So basically the solution or the option number one to see is we need to bring and raise more awareness about the documentation of war crime, which is essential. And therefore, I'm very much thankful for UK government, but also many other, let's say, governments here present who are supporting Ukraine, and specifically the prosecutors within collecting the documentation cases, because it's a massive one. And specifically what the photos of Izium that you've seen yesterday of the civilians, specifically of the reports that Ricardo and Sergei and Evgenia were reporting. So it means that it's a massive case. And therefore, in order to have this special tribunal, making it presence, as Sir John Whittingale was telling us, that it's not only about, and Ricardo Gutierrez, it's not about Putin or Lukashenko itself. It's about, you know, bringing justice back to those people who suffered, and raising awareness about why the war documentation of the war crime is so essential enough. We need to raise awareness, of course, the coverage in the media. Myself working with some of the Belgian and Italian medias, and to tell you the truth, it's very hard sometimes to beat, you know, some of smart sporty stories with the stories about the rule of law prevailing in the news media coverage. But it's essential to be done, because people need to know that these things are happening in the 21st century, which shouldn't be happening at all on any kind of the countries, on any kind of the continent itself. My second appeal will be, of course, saying that upcoming election in some of the countries, and also mentioning the European parliamentary elections, we tell it's that the disinformation in these countries is skyrocketing. And one of the tools that, of course, we have to understand that disinformation every day kills people in Ukraine. They are journalists, they are civilians, they are territorial defense units, and so on only. And the information domain presents one of the major combat zones together with air, ground, and sea. And Russian disinformation missiles try to hit each and every political leader, or social group, or even community, flooding with some malign content and rising disputes among many citizens. Because what the world is demonstrating to Russian Federation is a unity, and therefore breaking this unity is something that is a focus now with the malign content, that a lot of the let's say information is happening just right now, and a lot of the content is not being checked. And that's why I'm saying that it's also academia is very much important, because that's the masses that we are bringing to the young people as such, and raising awareness what's there happening. My next point number 3, justice is one side. And of course, it's important that we say Impunity is the root of all of the reasons why the second Russian Federation offense continues. It's definitely not normal when war turns people into numbers, because the masterpiece of narrating the story and presenting that as an important tool, which we do not say how many people die, where it's also important, but we present the face of these people. We bring back them to justice, and returning people's dignity even after their deaths is our priority as Ukrainians, as academia in my sense. I know that a lot of journalists in Ukraine and in the international media are bringing that, but we will need to enlarge that, because bringing dignity to people is something that we as a democratic state, we as Ukrainians are keeping ourselves and prioritizing. If we talk, of course, about basically winning, or the concept of winning, now that we hear a lot in the media about the peace deals so possible, or just appealing to bring peace to Ukraine, and just specifically in the European Parliament, there are many debates. In the national parliaments, a debate. One important tool and a message to understand: we will on the one under one condition, when everyone realizes that the war affects everyone. It's both in Ukraine and it's abroad, because when we have a problem with an information domain, it's one of the channels to which we are listening. So therefore, of course, yesterday I've seen many of the British journalists being in Kyiv physically, and there are many of them who are already present in Ukraine, but it never used to be prior for that. And therefore, my message is just, each and every one as Ukrainian, we are presenting to you as an international audience the new Ukraine. It's a transformative Ukraine. Some of the countries are opening our, let's say, opportunities. Some of our countries just raising awareness where this country is present, unfortunately, due to such conditions. But not only, Ukraine presents some new solutions and the opportunities. And I think that narrating these stories, that it's not only the rule of law that is pervasive, but also the opportunities that together with Ukrainian journalists, academia, civil society, politicians, we can bring together in order basically to contemplate and to contest that democratic values is not only two words, democratic and values. They have to stick together in order to make sure that we have actually our next day. I'm thanking each and every day the armed forces of Ukraine, the territorial defense units, who are supporting us to even make this online event possible, that we are streaming it. Even if we are listening to the Ukrainians who are here in the audience, or who are here as an attendees, even here that international community is listening to us, because the message is important. We want to make sure that this new transformative Ukraine is being basically more in the media. So therefore, as an associate professor, I'm always kind of welcoming the student and saying, investing in Ukraine's language studies, investing in Ukraine's cultural and history study, it's a new opportunity when we're gonna come to reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukraine, because this is a new name or wave of the solutions and support that we're gonna have. And supporting Ukraine, it's not only because of thinking of business or then returning to the business of usual. Supporting of Ukraine, as for me, it's mostly making sure that we are building better, and we are focusing about common future, we are focusing about the common values, and we making it not only words, but a reality. Thank you.
Victoria, thank you. We've now got a bit of time in which we can invite questions. There have been a couple already come up on the Q&A box, particularly around the issue of what support can be given either by journalists outside of Ukraine, or more so by governments and others wishing to provide financial support. Can I just ask, or can I first of all invite anybody with questions, please, to pose them now? But perhaps to start, can I ask Sergey and Yevgenia whether you have received support from Western governments or others in terms of trying to help you carry out your work?
Okay, but Maybe for this session, I will ask Alisa to help me with interpretation. Okay. Так. Я намагаюсь дати відповідь. Я говорю можливо, ось так. Шановні колеги, дякую. Це дуже важливе питання щодо економічної підтримки українських журналістів і медіа. Дійсно, ми говоримо, що ця підступна російська війна, вона руйнує підвалини журналістів і медіа, і, відповідно, нам необхідно докладати зусилля, щоб все ж були можливості забезпечити стійке інформування українців і отримання надзвичайно важливої верифікованої інформації, яка може рятувати життя для частини українців, які особливо проживають на прифронтових і деокупованих територіях. Дійсно, на сьогодні існують різні програми міжнародні. Ми дуже вдячні різним міжнародним партнерам за те, що вони намагаються асистувати запити на підтримку. Водночас ми бачимо, що все ж на сьогодні недостатньо цих ресурсів і цих програм для стійкого втримання всієї екосистеми медійної в Україні. Сьогодні ми фіксуємо, що приблизно третина українських медіа, третина особливо локальних медіа, вони припинили своє існування, або ми бачимо масове скорочення журналістів, і ми бачимо масове згортання доступності місцевих джерел інформації для українців. І, відповідно, тут ми хотіли би, щоб особливо український уряд у партнерстві з урядами західних країн утворив певну інституцію. Ми би бачили, це фонд розвитку українських медіа, який, власне, і наповнювався ресурсами для системної стійкої підтримки медіа в цей найважчий час для нас. І, власне, це фонд, він не лише підтримував би медіа і журналістів, а це фонд підтримки мільйонів українців до достовірної доступу їхнього до достовірної інформації.
Okay, thank you, Sergey. Yevgenia, have you had any direct support?
Yes,
from?
I can add some words to Sergey. Yes, we received support from our donors. We had some financial reserve when we were under occupation, and it helped us. The National Union of Journalists of Ukraine helped us a lot, and thank you very much for this. Kavun City is alive because you are. Now we are supported by our donors, and it's very important for us because, as Sergey told, many media stopped their work. We worked even without support, sometimes some weeks. But it's our life. Media is our life, and we were ready to write even without support. But I know that it's not for a long time because support is very important. So now we are supported by our donors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a question come up regarding what is being done to block or counter Russian disinformation. And obviously that's something which Sergey has already flagged as being one of the key tasks of journalists, to report truth against the barrage of propaganda. But I don't know if you or any of our other panelists would like to add to that. Victoria, I can see a hand raised.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's important to say that disinformation is massive, but it doesn't mean that pre-bunking, not debunking, but pre-bunking is an efficient tool, in countering disinformation. And therefore, my key message here, of course, when we have a successful, let's say, events within and due to the armed forces of Ukraine, the international media immediately continues to cover that, so therefore, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that it should stop. And therefore, as I told you, we, those who are working within the journalists as an expert, we are in the rear, but we are very much needed in order to continue communicating to the societies what's happening in Ukraine, because we do understand that even within the national, let's say, Stratcom, as we say, as the one that is an institution, the governmental institution, which is to prevent or debunk the information, it's not enough, and it's not even essential sometimes. The most important is to continue telling the truth in such a way, and that's why I mentioned that in my remarks, that continue narrating the stories in such a way that they are appealing and understandable to the societies. In my case, for example, I'm working with Italian media, which is completely different with the British media, for example, and the way we are structuring the message sometimes is different. It doesn't mean that being emotional as I am just right now, a la Italian style, it doesn't mean that I'm not telling the truth. I am. The problem is just there are many stories to tell, and sometimes for people it's very hard to understand how is it to be in the bomb shelter, how is it to be under the occupation, how is it to be, in trying to struggle to as a volunteer to find some money, to the ammo, to other things. It's just very broad and encompassing, and therefore we are the most efficient, of course, tool as a solution number 3 from me, of course, to invite more international media to come to Ukraine. Because if you remember the first month of a full-scale invasion, there are not so many medias, popping in the first days to Kyiv. They started to arrive mostly step by step, but it was for them, and of course for the international society, a bit confusing the picture, whether indeed in the 21st century, we can see the pictures as we could see. Thank you.
Victoria, thank you. Ricardo, you wanted to add to that?
Yes, exactly. I think it's important to remind that the best antidote to disinformation is journalism. I mean, professional journalism, ethical journalism, quality journalism. Maybe that's something we didn't mention, but a year ago when we started to give support to our colleagues in Ukraine, first of all, there was a huge wave of solidarity from journalist organization. We collected in a few days, together with some donations from institutions like UNESCO, 500,000 euros in a few days. Our first reaction was to think about how to save our colleagues, how to make them, to allow them to leave the country, to be protected. And our colleagues in Ukraine told us, but no, we want to stay here. We want to do our job as journalists. That's the best way to protect our country. And of course, we immediately changed our minds and we dedicated the money we collected to create what we call solidarity centers, 6 solidarity centers in 6 different cities in Ukraine. And these solidarity centers are places where journalists can come to work. They can find, laptops connected with the internet. They can also find protective equipment, helmets, bulletproof vests, and so on. And that was I mean the most efficient way to support our colleagues, to give them the possibility to continue to do their job in the country, and to continue to inform us in Europe about what was happening in the country.
I'm following on from that. We did have a question relating to the amount of disinformation which is inevitable during war, and how journalists can best differentiate between truth and disinformation. Is there anybody who'd like to take that on? Nope.
Yeah, maybe just tell you that, you know, it's the basic job of a journalist, you know, to make the difference between fake information and real reliable information. But I also believe that at the level of the European Federation of Journalists, we are also supporting many media literacy programs, because we believe that the citizens should also have the capacity, you know, by their own, to make difference, to distinguish real information, reliable information, and fake news. So I believe that it's a joint and global effort from the community, from the society, you know, to fight against disinformation. But for journalists, it's the basic, you know, it's what we do every single day, you know, to check information, to verify sources, multiple sources. And that's it. You know, I'm a bit worried about the narrative about the importance to support fact checkers networks, because it's like journalists are not fact checking. That's not true. I think I welcome the efforts from fact checking organizations. That's not a problem. But we should understand that journalists are the first fact checkers, and we need to support them to give them the means to do their job. Again, the best way to tackle disinformation is journalism, is you know, to do the job following ethical rules, with the sense of the public interest. As a journalist, I've been working as a journalist for 25 years. I never had the impression to work for my boss, you know, the boss of my company, you know, my media company. I was working, I used to work for citizens, you know, to give them the right to access free, reliable, and independent information.
I'm not sure there is a huge distinction between journalism and fact-checking. Fact-checking is a part of journalism, as you say, and you know, reporting on disinformation and exposing it as lie is a very important part of what you are doing. And certainly in the UK, a lot of work was done about the mother who was photographed when the maternity hospital was bombed, and the Russians made out that she was an actress or it was all staged, and a lot of research went into proving that was not true, and that seems to me an important part of journalism. But Yevgenia, you have your hand up on that.
Yes, I can add some words about fact-checking in occupation. Russian propaganda is very dangerous. The Russian tried to block television and radio. They broadcast Russian programs in Kherson reporting on fake crimes of Ukraine. But the people often feel the truth. They feel emotions. They feel the rhetorics. People in Kherson had access to information through, for example, messengers like as Telegram channels, and as Serhiy said, in markets, people connected. And as journalists, we have some fact-checking projects on Kavun City. We connected with our colleagues such as Bez Brechni, Nota Yenota, Potobik Novin, and others, and they helped us to write about Russian fakes in our city. So we had the opportunity to write the truth, and people in occupation are very attentive. They really feel the words, they feel the emotions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Victoria, you were also seeking to come in.
Thank you so much. Just short remarks. It's very important for us to still communicate as a journalist, as an academia, as a civil society expert, as a politician, as just experts to the international media. And to tell you the truth, we are very much inviting international media to Ukraine to continue to talk to people and try to, let's say, equip themselves with not only emotions, but again, the true stories. And last but not least, we are always talking, about Rammstein as a kind of defense, cohort of people who would support the weapon and ammo to Ukraine. We are joking in the expert community, we should create information Rammstein, something that will keep, within narratives and unity within what's in a true happening in Ukraine. So maybe with this appeal to you thinking about information Rammstein as a platform to continue, maybe it will be a very nice message as an outcome of this meeting as well. Thank you.
Well, it's one I would certainly support. I think the information war is going to be as critical as any other part of this war. So anything we can do to support that, I'd be keen to explore. We're sort of pretty much at the end now. Are there any final questions which anybody would like to raise? If not, then can I thank our four panelists, particularly for your extremely valuable contributions to the debate this afternoon, but also to say thank you to Justice for Journalists, Maria, and the Foreign Policy Centre for putting this together. Susan, who has just come onto my screen. I do think it's been extremely useful, and I hope it's something that we can continue to monitor, because as I say, I think this is a extremely important part of the war, both in terms of getting out the truth of what is happening, but also in future, as we've discussed, making sure that those responsible are held to account one day. Maria or Susan, do you want to just round up with any comments?
Just merely to say thank you very much, John, for chairing the event, and to all the panelists for their excellent contributions. We were delighted to host this in collaboration with our longtime partners, Justice for Journalists Foundation. And we'll be, just a note to say, we'll be continuing to do more events on Ukraine in the upcoming weeks and months. So please do follow us on social media and at our website for more information. And I just wanted to flag that we did produce a short series of reflections marking the anniversary of the war that we published on our website last week, including from Sergei here. So I do encourage people to check that out. Otherwise, yes, thank you very much, everyone. And thank you for attending. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thanks.